remember sitting with the counselor when I was a sophomore in high school, and they were asking, well, what do you want to do with your life? The only thing I could think about was I didn't want to wear a tie, and I don't know why. And beyond that, I really didn't have much direction. But I knew that I felt that life was short and that I wanted to just not do what I considered being normal. Not even sure exactly what that meant, but I just wanted to do something unique. Why, I don't know. And didn't really search for it. Happily fell into it.
We do a number of things for young artists, particularly young musicians. We set people up and there, we invite folks, and it's a fundraiser for NPR. But for me, it's wow, I can have these brilliant musicians in my house and play. It just, everybody ends up graduating to that picture. Oh, you've got a Larson, really? Wow, how'd you get that? You know, you the eyes going back and forth. You know? But it's fun because, you know, the people that recognize it recognize really fine art.
I mean, what told me was that very first show that I saw when I walked by and the red dots were on everything. And there was this energy. It was a, you know, kind of a smaller gallery, but there was just this energy and this buzz in there. And it was palpable. Just the manner of his work and the light and the detail and the colors and the shadows, it's just magical and just takes people's breath away.
The mentality focuses on contemporary art in a more abstract and more social-oriented way. And that tends to be the primary interest of faculty and students. And there's a host of reasons for that. Obviously, the students are going to be far more interested in what's happening now. And what's happening now is very diverse. Also, what's happening now is a rediscovery of classical form. And this is where Jeffrey's work comes into play.
This way I won't mess up the drawing, but I want to make some exaggerated statements. What is that one?
That's a 2 each, here's a 4.
Okay, that's good. So what we really got here, I mean, we're trying to describe what's happening. It ended up where, you know, I was always the class artist, like a lot of us, and without any thoughts of being a professional artist, I didn't even know that was an option or a possibility. But I enjoyed it immensely and did it all the time. The only other thing in school that I was fairly good at or enjoyed was science. So I thought, well, as I was just making a decision where I was going to go, I thought, well, medical illustration, that might be the way to go. I had this character flaw where all through school, if I enjoyed what I was doing or if I had interest, I got A's, and if I didn't, I almost failed. I just didn't do what I didn't want to do and became obsessive about what I did want to do. There was a good program up at the University of Duluth that had a strong science department and medical illustration, so I was all signed up, ready to go. My senior year, with a lot of the football team, I guess we took pottery just for fun, and I was the only one who couldn't throw a pot, so I was failing pottery. The teacher said that, well, all right, here's the deal. If anybody wants to go to the Institute of Arts for an extra credit after school, I'll guarantee a C-. I thought, I better do that. So we went. And right away I snuck away from the pottery exhibit. I could care less. Went off into these paintings. Well, here I'd been painting and drawing my whole life, and I'd never been to a museum. And I was amazed. I was blown away. And there was a young guy who was doing a copy of an amazing painting. I chatted with him, and he told me about this school whose name I couldn't pronounce. Said, you should really check it out if you like art. It's called Atelier Lac.
An atelier is like an academy. It's like a studio. And these private studios took a lot of students in the 19th century. And one of the best ones in Paris was known as the Académie Julienne. And now the Académie Julienne was very progressive because it not only had men, it also trained women, and women who were going to have a career as painters. Who taught in the Académie Julienne? Some of the most famous academic painters of the time, like Bouguereau, like others of that ilk. What does this mean? Well, for the women, it meant that they could have a career, not just knitting or not just doing little doilies, but actually doing paintings. Many of them became teachers in other art schools. And the Académie Julienne had an international following. And they were very significant teachers for younger students and could inspire these younger students to have their own careers, to become painters in the realist mode.
So Richard Lack had studied with Ives Gammell, who was born in the late 1800s. So Gammell primarily had studied with a gentleman named William McGregor Paxton, who had studied under Jérôme, who ran the École des Beaux-Arts. Jérôme had studied with Delaroche. Delaroche had studied with Ong. Would study with David, both David and Ong. You'd recognize their paintings. They painted Napoleon. It's a fun pedigree in a sense. I called up Richard Lack. He said, well, why don't you come on down? I'd love to show you the school. That was in Minneapolis. And he said, why don't you bring your portfolio? And so I brought a few drawings. And we chatted, and I saw the school. And, you know, in my mind, it was just really interesting, and it was just kind of for giggles. But I was already accepted at the university and was going to, you know, go on. But he said, you know, we should talk more. So I think we had a couple phone conversations, and then he invited me out to his studio. Literally, I knocked on the door, he opens the door, and it was boom. This is what I need to do. It was flooded with like, this is my future, this is my life. Through the course of our conversations, he'd been like, really encouraged me to apply to his school. He only accepted 3-4 people a year. And so I finally, yeah, I want to go to your school. You know, I'd like to apply. What do I need to do? And he says, I don't want you. It's like, well, can I at least apply? No. I'm like, well, I want to be an artist. No, you don't. And it just got to be real cantankerous, where I was just like, I don't get it. You know, we just spent the last week or two having conversations. You trying to talk me into it, and now you're saying no. And he said, okay, here's the deal. If you go to my school, if I even accept you, you're going to have to study for 4 or 5 years, extremely hard. Then afterwards, as you're probably pushing a broom or waiting tables, you're going to have to work full-time on your art. And after 10 years, at that point, maybe you'll see if you have any talent or not, and then you're going to spend the rest of your life starving. And I said, yes, sign me up. This is what I want. He said, all right, well, take some night classes, and we'll just see how you do. I took every single night class I could. Every 2-3 weeks, I think I called him and brought my work. Here's what I've been doing. Here's what I've been doing. On weekends, I would paint and draw. Finally, I thought by early summer, he made me wait that long. He accepted me. I thought he just warmed down. I thought he was just sick of me. And so, of course, I told my dad, Dad, guess what? I'm going to drop out of college before I start. I'm going to be an artist, you know. Now, I don't know if you spend any time looking at, you know, other really good drawings, especially like simplified ones, that even just getting the shadow shapes and contours correct, and then sort of hinting at the basics of the soft edges, how solid that looks. How already that's like, man, I understand what's going on in that simplified, parsed out bit of information. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Learning about the knowledge passed on through this lineage, where you felt the pressure that with this knowledge you have no excuse not to get good. But yet, because of this knowledge, you know how to have a way. The first day of actual class, Steve Jertson came in, and here's how you sharpen your pencil. This is the kind of paper you use. You're going to set up this cast. Here's how you lay it in. There it is. Afternoon, here's a figure model. This is how you sharpen your pencil. This is how you lay it in. Good luck. It's practical. You go in and you learn to make mistakes. And the best teaching was basically showing us where we had failed. And you had to toughen up, in a sense, pretty quick. They were never cruel by any means. It was just they expected a lot out of you, and this is how you learn. It's not so much even learning how to paint, how to draw, it's retraining yourself to see. Of course we see color. We see that that's red, that's blue, that's green, a tree is green. It really isn't. And suddenly you learn to see it truthfully. And then beyond that, you almost see the light bouncing off. And suddenly the world shifted, and I could see that. And that week driving back and forth, I probably was almost killed 10 times because, wow, you just see colors you never saw. So you don't necessarily see different, you just see more. Where you are and where you want to be, you never get any closer. So when I would improve, I wanted to be here. You have this vague, foggy notion of where, you know, I think there's something beyond this. At first it's very evident, yeah, make the drawing look like the person you're drawing and so on, but it's interestingly enough continued my entire life. And so in some sense, for where I hope that someday I might be, looking at old masters' works, seeing where I could maybe go, in my, you know, I passed that, but now I want to be here, you know, and so you always live on the edge of frustration, and it's about straddling it. So on one, you don't become complacent and arrogant, oh, I can paint this, and just not challenge yourself, but you don't want to step over into depression. So when you graduate, to be honest, I was ready to. I just, you can only go to school for so long. I wanted to see what I could do. On the other hand, I was slightly terrified because I knew I wasn't as good as I needed to be by any means, and I had a long ways to go. You kind of get good enough to see how bad you are. Sometimes there's just not a lot of information to grab. Fine. Then don't grab it. Go somewhere where there is information.
Yeah.
Okay?
Easy stuff.
Yeah. But other than that, it looks really pretty good. The feet are too long, but let's just kind of maybe erase it back, and if you have time later, since this is our last day on it, so.
Totally.
Okay, good.
Cool. Thank you very much.
I'd been invited to be the assistant director and the head instructor of a new school that was opened up, and so I at least had a studio and a small stipend and some focus to my life.
I first met Jeff at Atelier Lesueur, and I walked in, and it was the first year of the school, and he was there as one of the first teachers. Within that first week, he had to give a talk on something, the aspect of what we were going to be learning, or how to start our first cast, or whatever it was. I just remembered I couldn't hear a word he was saying because all I was thinking about is this guy is enthusiastic. The enthusiasm was just like palpable, and I just thought, wow. And that was the first time I ever thought, this guy is amazing. That and the blonde curly hair, I guess. But.
You know, for the first year or two, you know, I kept it very professional, but there was something about her, you know, to be honest, there's something about her I just couldn't quit thinking about. So first I asked her to sit for a little pencil portrait. And evidently, I make a lot of faces when I paint. So the entire time she just laughed at me. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And so good. And it just kind of chilled things for me. I don't know why, but it was like, okay. But then that feeling kept coming back, and I thought, well, crap.
He decided, you know, he knew it wasn't proper really to ask an art student out, but he just couldn't get it out of his mind. He wanted to ask me out. It was obvious that I was attracted to him and he was attracted to me. So he wrote this little formal note about asking me out, and just like, will you come to dinner at Jeff's studio? This is the time, and he handed it to me in this little scroll tied with a ribbon. And so I took it out and read it, And I was just so shocked, I hit him.
And so I had one of my roommates, we cooked all day and we decorated the studio. We had Christmas lights on the floor as a dance floor. Ronnie, he was a student too, but we roomed together. He dressed up as a waiter, so she shows up and
Knocked on the door, and here his roommate came to the door, and I said, "Oh, hey, Ron, how are you?" And he wouldn't acknowledge me. He's like, "Ma'am." And he had a tuxedo on, he had a white towel across his, and he sat me at a table that Jeff had set out. And I think he was planning that this first date would fail, and then he wouldn't have to worry about it, think about it, he wouldn't have to be dating a student, it wouldn't work, but he just had to get it off his plate because he couldn't quit thinking about it. So
it went great, sadly, in a way. It's like, well, that didn't work. So from then on, it was, I just knew she was the one. It was that simple. And I think she caught on pretty soon that maybe I was the one. And
the rest is history.
so after 3 years, we decided to move on. And I didn't want to teach anymore. I realized I wanted to be a full-time painter, that I wanted to dedicate every moment I had to getting better. I wasn't getting better fast enough. This was a wonderful year in my life in a sense though, because it was then that summer that Heidi and I got married. We painted together every day. So it was just that wonderful engagement time where here I'm with the woman I'm gonna marry who's painting side by side, and so we were oblivious.
Our studio was the size of, I don't even know what size it was, but it was where I was short enough and he was tall enough. And so we were sharing the studio, and when we would back up, I was working on one side of the room and he was on the other side of the room, and when we'd go back and forth, my palette would fit right underneath his, and it worked really well.
We just lived on nothing. A big night out for us was we'd go get an icy, and there was a $1 movie theater. That was a splurge. You realize you're in for the long haul.
There are much fewer painters working in what Jeffrey refers to as classical realism than those who are working in multidisciplinary, expressionistic, or more experimental form. It has a lot to do with how the history of the development of Western art is coincident with the development of capital.
The world shifted dramatically around World War I, a devastating war, followed immediately by a yellow fever that killed more people than the war had. Communism was on the rise. Empires were falling. Monarchies were being replaced. America was hitting its stride. The innovations at that time, the telegraph, they could talk to someone in Europe. They had the automobile. They had the beginnings of planes. I mean, what a time of just vast change, when prior to that, it really hadn't changed much for centuries. I think people wanted something different, something new. So modernism hit all the arts. It hit the culture. We need something new. Let's take all this new stuff happening. What are we going to create with this? There was a split, obviously, in the aesthetic of people wanting to explore this new abstraction, this new modernism, which is wonderful, great. Then you should do that. But there was also artists that saw beauty in the visual world, and every generation repaints the world, and it always had anyway. There's nothing not modern about a contemporary person painting what they see and feel and experience in a way that other people can look at and also relate to, because they see that too. But unfortunately, we were, in a sense, kind of forced underground. Museums wouldn't put on shows, galleries wouldn't show their work. And so it was within a couple generations, the people that had the training that could have passed it on fell into obscurity. The young people wanted to be new, they wanted to be modern, they didn't want to be old-fashioned, they didn't quite see the benefit. And it doesn't take long where knowledge is lost.
America had excellent collections of realist painters. Some of the best museums. Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. What happened to these works? They weren't of the times, they weren't modern. So instead of keeping them in the basement, they got rid of them. They deaccessioned them. Should never have happened. This would never happen in Europe. They don't do this. But there's this rush to judgment over here. This is America. This is not Europe. Europe, they have an ingrown sensitivity to works of art. In America, we don't. We have an ingrown sensitivity to money.
It didn't take long then where we had these artists who were world famous, respected artists. By the end of their life, couldn't get a show, and their work they couldn't sell. You know, I think Wyeth is probably the best example of someone who somehow was able to rise above. But besides him and Anagoni over in Europe, there really weren't a lot of artists who were really spectacular in a sense that didn't have to fight and struggle to survive because the world had kind of put them aside. And so it kind of went underground. And so there's a whole tradition continued among very strong-willed, strong-minded individuals who that was their vision of what they wanted to be. And they saw the value as that as a modernist expression of art and continued it on, and fortunately for me, passed it on.
The realist movement didn't die. People think it did. What realist movement? What are you talking about? Well, it didn't die. It's been there.
From an audience standpoint, classical realism is very successful, very successful. From an academic standpoint, it shows the students what real drawing looks like.
We were not knowing at all what we were going to do. You know, after many, many, many long walks, trying to dream what we could do, Heidi applied for a job as a nanny housekeeper. Well, it ended up being a wonderful family that was old money. So after we were married, they became more friends of ours, and they hosted 2 shows for us in their beautiful, beautiful home.
We cut all of our frames out in the backyard with this old miter saw. Just the corners were awful, but it was the best we could do, and we worked so hard to get everything framed.
I think I had to borrow $500 from my dad, which killed me. I don't like borrowing money, and so we had everything in for this. So they invited the who's who, they catered it. It was wonderful. They gave us the entire house, take down whatever you want, put it up, change the lights. It was phenomenal. Everybody had a great time, and everybody left, and we realized we hadn't sold a thing. People just forgot to buy anything. Mrs. Fullerton said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. You guys move in here. Here's my phone book. I'm gonna check off all the people that were here. You're gonna start calling them. You tell them to come back, that this show's gonna stay up for a week. Wonderful. So here I'm calling all these people. And I know we met you the other night. You might want to come back. Why? Because that was so awkward. It was horrible. I'm not a business person. I was not a business person. I was actually pretty shy. And this was, but you do what you got to do. And I'm talking to one woman. She says, okay, this is the 4th time we've chatted. If I promise to come, will you quit calling me? It's like, oh, sorry, yes. She came and she bought 3 paintings. By the end of the week, we had sold well over half the show, probably 2/3 of the show, and we had some money. And that was the beginning then for us of, with this clientele then, we started getting commissions. People would come and want to see what we were doing. Word started to spread. The Fullertons were kind enough to put on 1 more show for us the following year. That went even better, but that got our foundation going. I didn't want to paint like anybody else. I wanted to paint the best I could paint, and I had to be somewhat alone to do that. And Heidi felt the same way for herself.
We both knew we wanted to live out of the city.
And so we found an old school up in northern Wisconsin that we purchased and converted to a studio home.
It was a cement block, flat roof, ugly, 7,500 square foot building that was horrible.
We thought that we could convert the business we had growing in the Twin Cities and market long distance. And one, there was a mini recession that hit back in 1989 when we moved. Second, no, we didn't know how to market long distance. So by the following August, we had a little boy, Brock, and by the following December, we were flat broke.
It was just like a really kind of sobering moment in our lives because we had this little baby and we had to, you know, make sure he was cared for.
It was the day before Christmas. We had bought Brock a golden book. It was 35 cents, that's all we had. We were sitting on the step in my studio. They had turned off our phone. I had like one log literally left to throw in the fire outside to keep the heat going. They were gonna turn off our electricity the next day. We were done, and I felt like the biggest loser. That moment, we went from despair, in a sense, to just flooded with peacefulness, where it's like, well, no, we have each other. We have this little baby. We're blessed. This life's not bad. And we felt okay. Well, we were invited down to Christmas with my parents that year. We were supposed to leave that next day, but we didn't have enough gas in our car to even get us anywhere. I mean, it was pretty much empty.
My grandma had sent us a Christmas card with like $10 in it, and we thought, okay, so we can put gas on our little car and make it down at least to Hinckley, which is halfway down to the cities.
At that point, I'll just call my dad and just, Dad, you gotta come and get us. You know what? You know, we had no cell phones. We didn't know how to get a hold of them. And so we took off.
This storm came up off of Lake Superior. They come up so fast. It was like total whiteout. Jeff's white knuckling it, and I'm just backseat driver, new mom, and it was just very nerve-wracking. We have this little baby in the backseat, and all of a sudden,
this $20 bill hit the windshield, and the wipers blew it off. And Heidi, that was a 20.
And I said, no, there's no way. And he's like, I'm not kidding, I'm stopping. And I said, you can't stop. You're gonna get hit from behind if someone doesn't see you. Don't get out of the car, please. What if we get tail-ended because of the visibility was so poor? And he said, no, I've gotta go look. And he pulls over as far as he could. He's over in the snowbank, and I'm just barely trying to see him and just hoping that he gets back in the car quick without getting hit by another vehicle. And he comes running back to the car, and sure enough, he has a $20 bill, and he's laughing. He's like, see, I told you. I'm like, are you kidding me?
I had one painting that I happened to have a frame for him that I had put in the car, I think just to show my folks or something. And anyway, we get down there, and I had this thought, I should call, it was one of our old clients. And so I just, hey, I'm just calling to wish you Merry Christmas, you know, just, hey, do you have any artwork? It's like, I do. I don't have anything for my wife. Get over here. So I bring the painting over, and he loved it, and I'll take it. Well, that gave us about 3 months of living expenses, which in those 3 months I rethought how to market long distance.
And that's when I think we both got like really serious. This isn't fun and games anymore. We can't just, you know, live on popcorn and go to the dollar theater for fun. We have a child now that we have to take care of. So I think that's when we really started to get serious about, you know, we've got to figure out a way to make this work, because we didn't want to get the 9-to-5 jobs. We didn't want to have to do anything else. And I think Jeff knew that that would be a kiss of death to his painting career if he had to get a job and just paint on the weekends or paint in the evenings. It just wouldn't have happened. And I wanted to help him in the whole marketing aspect. I don't think you can do it on your own as an artist. I really think behind every successful artist there's someone that's right beside them, supporting in every way possible. And that also included posing. So we did hours and hours of me standing out in the water, not just so he could paint paintings, but so he could learn. And that was part of my support in trying to make sure that we could actually make this a viable living for our family.
She just worked side by side in most everything we did, including being on the other side of the canvas posing for me. I never got into this for the money. When I could make a living at this, I was thrilled. And we've had years that were, in my mind, profoundly, amazingly good. And I never thought, wow, that's great. We've got some money now. We're doing good. It was like, good. I've got 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2. I have 2 years where I don't have to think about money. I can just paint. And for me, it's freedom. In my mind, I don't have a choice. I have to do this, which is strange, and I don't know that I understand it. And especially the family can be very self-centered. Not that I'd want to do anything else, but what could I do? I've been doing this for almost 40 years. And I do recognize that as I had children, as I had responsibilities, I worked hard. I knew it was up to me. So that was a good thing. And through hard work, and hopefully smart work, I improved. And through improving, and not only just in my work, but in how I presented it to people, things went well. I see people doing well in this world, in the art world. If I can't do well, that's my problem. I'm missing something. I'm not smart enough. I'm not thinking it through thoroughly. I'm not making the connections I need to do. I'm not painting the paintings I need to paint. I get encouraged, the tough times. Living on the edge of frustration is where you will learn what you need to know in life. If you're comfortable, you don't learn anything. So in my mind, instead of jumping ship when things are tough, it's just more a kick in the butt, like, okay, there's a breakthrough you need to make, and let's make it. Someone had mentioned a guy named Soroya. He said he's got a show in St. Louis. It closes this week, and this was a Friday. You should really see it. And me and Heidi thought, well, let's go. I literally was standing in front of this painting, and this little old lady came up and tapped me and showed, you need to close your mouth. It was the painting he did of the women mending the sails. And I'd just never seen art like that before. I didn't want to paint like him. I wanted to figure out how he painted that, though. That became a quest for me. How do you render light on the figure such as that? The laundry series, I guess people call it. In my mind, it's not so much a series, but an opportunity where it just struck me where I could become the symphony conductor. By having these sheets, I get to paint the outdoor figure, which I'm just still passionate about. And yet at the same time, I can have plain sheets, I could have floral sheets, I could have pattern, I could have flat light, bounce light, reflected light, refracted light, direct light. It was like a different instrument. I could just create and compose in light.
I was shopping at a nearby mall, the Galleria, and where Jeff was represented. I didn't know of his work, and I walked by the gallery and I looked in the window, and these paintings just took your breath away. The laundry was the first thing that grabbed me in that first show. I just loved the play of light, so evocative of life here in Minnesota. You know, it could have been any generation. I didn't even know at the time what the red dots meant. I just knew that there was this painting, and I loved it so much. And I learned quickly what the red dots meant, and that one was already sold. When I see something that just captivates me, I know there's something there, and I'll paint it. It's like, well, okay, that wasn't it. I'll paint it again. I'll paint it again. And it's really me trying to get behind the surface to see what was it that just made me want to paint this. And it's usually not that set up. It's sometimes not even the subject matter. There's some abstract component within that just resonates. It took me 25 years to kind of do that painting that initially I think was always there, that I thought somehow wrapped together the best of the abstract qualities I saw with the piece that ended up winning the top figure piece for the ARC competition a couple years ago. And once I do that one that I just think feels, this is it, I'm bored after that. I have no interest to ever paint another one again. That's it then. I would just be doing it for sales, and I'm not going to paint that way.
Every other year then, Jeff would produce a body of work that we could take down, and he would have a one-man show at the Galleria.
It developed into a wonderful situation for us where I could make enough in that one show to go back and paint for a year and a half, 2 years, come back down, put on a big show, and that became the structure of our life. For me, it was the most wonderful thing because I could paint focused in a direction that interested me, and then it would culminate. And I would hang it up on the wall, and I could look at it. And it's like, okay, I like where this went. I'm not so big on this. What's my weakest thing? What do I need to work on next? And the next show usually was designed out of me focusing on working on that last sheep. And by this time, I had learned to enjoy still lifes because in the winters you can't paint outdoor figures.
His still lifes are just so phenomenal. The reflections and all the subtle nuances and everything, and they're just so amazing. But people would say that can't be real. You know, that can't be a painting because the detail was so magnificent.
I was painting pretty, looking back, well-crafted, boring still lifes like everybody else had painted before me. And I started this collection of these different balls, silver balls, gold balls, ornaments, just anything. I had this big bowl of balls. I was like, that's kind of weird. And then I started laying them around. Oh, that looks cool. And that was weird. And I just thought, this is a stupid idea for a painting. And yet I couldn't let it go. So I just, well, I'll set it up and I'll paint it. And then I'm done. I don't have to think about it anymore. So I did it and loved it. And at the same time, when time for our show to come up, well, I'm not showing, that's stupid. And Heidi's like, you gotta show it, I love that. I was like, no, you gotta show it. Could have sold it 20 times. And that was the first time I had an experience where maybe me following what was most important, I thought, to me, or most personal, touched the most people, which was interesting and fascinating. And so that became something I learned to trust more and more. I then became dissatisfied doing the same old setup of the bowl of fruit. And instead started I waited for something to just hit me more, like the balls that hit me of all things. Styrofoam's pretty ugly, it really, you know, but there was something about it, and I worked on this setup for a long time, and it fascinated me, and so I painted it, and I spent months painting it well. I'll say it was well painted. The values right, the color, you know, everything was right. And I looked at it, it didn't excite me like how the setup did. I was like, what the heck am I doing wrong? I just stared at it and stared at it, and I focused in on this handle where the light was hitting and bouncing off, and all of a sudden I realized on top of the highlight's yellow and the bottom's blue. And of course I'd studied prismatic light effect and how the light works and this and that. I realized that's just the rainbow condensed down into that highlight. And so I painted it, and all of a sudden it popped a little. I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And then I started looking at it more, and suddenly across this styrofoam, the rainbow appeared. And it wasn't that the light changed, I just saw different. The whole thing came alive to me. I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. And I spent 6 months repainting the entire thing. These paintings, sometimes I set them up because they're beautiful to me, but I do find that there's usually a deeper meaning or reason that I'm kind of creating a visual metaphor for me. Then some I figure out, some I'm still trying to figure out. And this one, it kind of grew into something beyond that with the symbolism of the bird and the butterfly and how nature, how life beats out anything we make. An ugly piece of styrofoam, it'll still become beautiful through, whether it's the flow of light. There's something beyond us that we never even come close to. From then on, I saw it different. It helped me become me in painting what I reacted to and having the confidence that, you know, maybe someone else will like it. I don't paint for other people. You know, to be honest, I've worked really hard. I studied hard. I've worked hard to master the craft. In my mind, I've learned to paint whatever I want to paint. I don't really care if other people don't like it, but I really do like it when they do. Through still life, I could take all the time in the world to set up the composition. I could work on the drawing, I could work on subtle value shifts, I could do the subtle, beautiful details. It's almost like playing chess. It's very intellectual. It's very much problem solving. I don't know that fun would ever be the correct word, but it's very satisfying intellectually. So by the time spring comes, I'm ready to get out. And I go outside, and that's different. That's game day. So it's, in a sense, you're practicing on still lifes, very just working on things. Outside, you have that hour and a half. It's game day. You can't sit and dawdle. What you gain outside is this punch of outdoor light, and you need to learn to take these pigments, which are just ground dirt for the most part. How do you capture sunlight? I mean, you take your purest white and you hold it up to a highlight on a glass. It's dull. You know, your brightest red next to the sun or yellow is just dull. How are you going to bring that to life? You know, it's this challenge, this constant challenge, and the sun's moving the whole time, and you're just hitting it, and you're painting it, and you're throwing Hail Marys because you just know it's failing. And by the end of the summer, you're tired. And then you're back in the studio. And what I started finding, interestingly enough, is that when I'd come back into the studio, my color was better. I was making quicker decisions. When I'd go back outside after the winter of painting still lifes, my drawing had improved. I could see the subtleties within the punch of light. And it just really ended up being a mechanism where I could improve better than if I hadn't done that. We lived in an area where there was a lot of homeschoolers, which I never heard of before. The thing that struck us was that you tended to have big families, and you'd have this, this high school kid, and you'd have this baby on the knee, and everybody in between, and they all loved each other. There was none of this, what I saw growing up in the cities, or just, kids being kids, and you get, the teenage years, and we never saw that. We thought, that's really something. That's pretty special. And so we thought, well, let's try it. Let's just see what happens. And so that we can continue to travel together. And we did it 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years, and just ended up being what we did the entire time. Kids were homeschooled, though, the whole way through. I could easily become obsessive, and I could easily work 24/7. I love to paint. I work really hard, and it's never work. I've got that next challenge I want to do. I'm never happier hardly than when I'm painting. But I didn't want to be one of those artists that didn't know my family. I didn't want to be where I sacrificed my family, as you hear stories about. And so I made a decision that I was going to also do my best to be a good husband and a good dad. And so part of that is I made them pose. If I had a project where I needed models or wanted to paint them, let's go to the beach, or let's go here, and we'd set up and paint, and then the others would get to play, and then we'd have a big bonfire. And it was a phenomenal way to live. And we traveled Europe, we traveled America, and just painting it as we went. And the kids got a unique upbringing. There's pros and cons. The chemistry wasn't the best, maybe, and our football team really sucked. But they got experiences that they wouldn't have had in school, and so it is what it is.
I grew up watching him paint, and I spent a lot of time just sitting in his studio, just kind of absorbing, and I loved watching him, whatever stage he'd be in, from a block in to middle stage or finishing. It was always just intriguing to just sit and watch.
So we joke that with Brock, because I'm an artist, his mom's an artist, his grandfather's an artist, his other grandmother became an artist, that apple dropped from the tree and didn't move. And it was beyond evident that he was born with an immense amount of talent, natural ability. And by the age of, I think he was 5 or 6, we were together donating pieces to different charities, and his pieces were being auctioned off for over $3,000.
We would sit down and draw together and just make things up on paper, but he never tried to instill it into me forcefully at all. It was definitely something that he just let organically kind of come about.
We'd have our shows. Well, Heidi and I we're working our butts off, and then we have these little kids, and starting especially with Brock, and it's like, what do you do with them? It's like, well, all right, you guys are gonna sit here, here, just draw or whatever. And it ended up being where people would start buying Brock's drawings, and he was just like, wow, this is interesting. So the next show, we'll give you a little corner, and you can work this year. We thought, well, this is perfect. As a homeschooler, let's teach him entrepreneurship. So he'd draw, and he did, so which is all he did. And he drew, and he'd draw, and then we'd frame it. We taught him how to frame. Since he was posing for me, he would earn money. So we said, well, you have to buy your frames. Well, we didn't charge him hardly anything, but he'd buy his frames, and he became a little businessman. Not many shows into doing that. 15 minutes into the show, he'd come find me. Well, I'm sold out, Dad. How you doing?
He started teaching once a month down at the Atelier in Minneapolis, and I went with him one time in my senior year. And just sitting in on the figure class and getting to kind of see what the Atelier daily lifestyle and routine is like, I decided within my first day that this is definitely the path I was going to take.
Knowing that I can be too exuberant and overbearing really didn't teach him that much. I knew that I would probably burn him out. And so he just did his thing. And by the time it got to be where he had to decide what he wanted to do, it was, I was just concerned that he wasn't going to follow as an artist because he felt he needed to, because his dad is, or because he'd gotten kudos for it his whole life. And he worked it out himself, and it became very evident to him, and profoundly so, that no, this is what he was born to do also. By this time, it went from 7 schools in the world to this renaissance of training has exploded. 2 colleagues of mine, who I went to school with, had taken over. Richard Lack had retired, I think now about 20 years ago, and sadly passed away. And there's strengths and weaknesses with every school. And Brock decided that training the eye, that impressionistic eye, that ability to break life down into certain puzzle pieces and translate that, he felt would give him the biggest base, and that the other things that other schools were better at, maybe he could then learn on the side. And I wanted to be part of his life and part of his training at that point, kind of help guide and direct him, and so he wouldn't make the same mistakes I made. So I was able to do that for 5 years, is come down, hang out with my son, and teach, and he just thrived. Through my experience of really teaching on an intensive basis early on, I felt that is something that he should have, and he agreed. He knew the benefits he was getting by having to verbalize. And so he started teaching at the Atelier.
I feel like teaching it, you have to think about all the different angles, or different angles to come at the same problem that you got to, which was maybe just in one realization, where you have to try to understand different ways around describing it and verbalizing it to a student. It forces me to really just buckle down and understand it, or research it if I need to.
I do love teaching, and I feel very grateful for what I was given. Richard Lack and Steve Jertson and others hadn't taken the time to show me what they knew, I would be nowhere. But I found I really loved it, and enjoyed working with these people that I saw myself in 20, 30 years ago.
Being in the Atelier world, I was really keeping an eye on all the other schools and all the different programs, and the approaches to the same sorts of problems that we were all, that all Atelier students were facing. I'm super grateful for everything that my teachers poured into me, but it was pretty narrow. So basically we set out to form a school that we wish we had gone to.
And that's how the concept of Great Lakes Academy started, which was going to be a small little room we rented with a couple students. Well, neither of us have the personality to stick with that. It's like, no, we're going to build the biggest, best school in the world, and whether it ever gets here or not, we don't care. We were just ready then to build our dream home, a nice little small place and beautiful little studio, and we had logged off a lot of the land and reshaped it, and we built a pond, and anyway, we were all set to go, and that's when this idea of the school grew.
We both just had this huge feeling that this is what we need to do. It's not retirement time for us. This is our next project. We need to do this, and we're either going to do it well or we're not going to do it at all.
A buddy called up and said, hey, have you ever looked at Old St. Peter's Church? No, I never heard of it. And one looked at it, and it was just crap. And it was old and boarded up, and had been sitting vacant for a number of years and allowed to kind of go into disrepair, and it was perfect. It's roughly 40 by 100, 2 floors, tall ceilings, north light. If I was to build from scratch a school, that would be the design. It was in disrepair, but it seemed to be more cosmetic. But I wasn't sure, so I was trying to do my due diligence and bring in contractors and try to figure things out. A friend of ours we hadn't seen for quite a while, you know, what are you doing? Hey, we're gonna buy a church. I love old churches. Can I come and see it? Yeah, we'll go check it out and go out to dinner and catch up. On the way to the church, another friend called and said, I just heard through the diocese that someone made a bid on it, and they're gonna make it, this was Friday, they were gonna make the decision on Monday. Was that you? And I'm like, no, I didn't, that was not me. It's like, well, you better figure something out because they're probably gonna take it. Like, I almost felt relieved, to be honest, because this did look daunting. It was perfect and terrible at the same time. So I called up my friend and said, well, listen, here's the deal, you know, we're not gonna be able to get it, so should we just go out to dinner? No, I love old church, let's go see it. Okay, great, so we go in and we're walking through there, and I'm kind of feeling pretty relieved, and she stops. She says, I'll cover it for you. I'll loan you the money. Because how on a Friday do you go to a bank and get the amount of money we needed to get this place? It wasn't gonna happen. And I'm like, crap, are you sure? You know, yeah. And I'm, Heidi, what do you think? You know, she says, let's do it. So we put in a bid, and we got the bid. And that was that. We owned a church. That then engulfed us and Brock into an 18-month period where we completely gutted it, completely remodeled it, new heat, new plumbing, new electric, fixed everything. It was 18-hour days, 7 days a week for 18 months, give or take.
I just remember waking up and just being so sore, so tired, and just thinking, I just can't do this one more day. And Jeff's like, yeah, I know what you feel like, but we are in it. We just have to keep going one step forward. So that was basically the theme of that whole year, just like get up and keep going, get up and keep going.
But in the end, we built the school we wanted.
Now we're at this point and it's like, wow, it worked. Just get up and keep going.
When it came to the school, and Brock and I started thinking about it, you know, there was a lot of good reasons why we knew we wanted to do it, but it was also a sacrifice on our part. And to be honest, Brock and I, we've paid our dues. We're paying our dues. We've earned, in a sense, the right, if you want to look at it that way, to keep pushing our art. We've gone through the boot camp, and now we're working our way up. And so to take time to train people who wouldn't be serious felt like we knew it would be, we'd feel it was a waste. That we're more than happy to pour everything we can into students as long as they're giving us everything they've got. And so when students apply here, first thing I do is try to talk them out of it. I said, no, you don't want to be an artist. Anybody that I can talk out of it shouldn't be an artist. In fact, I would never encourage anybody to be an artist. But I know for the person that was meant to be an artist, I couldn't talk them out of it. Well, that's one of my students then. So then those are the ones I accept. And I just tell them, you're putting all your eggs in one basket. This is not an easy life. And you're gonna have to fight. You're gonna have to work harder than everybody else. You never give up, you never quit. And with that said, we are gonna pour everything we have into you. And a big part of being an artist, you know, it's one thing to learn your values and learn your drawing and the craft. I mean, that's important, that's foundational, but it's not what's gonna make or break you. What I've seen over the decades, watching students come and go, people with insane amount of talent, when you expect the most out of them, well, maybe they end up not working that hard, or maybe they're too shy to meet with clients. Maybe they're too arrogant to learn beyond that. It usually ends up being a character flaw. Or it'll be, they start doing well and then they buy the big house, the big car, and suddenly they're in debt, and then they start cranking out paintings because they know they can sell them, and the quality goes down, and eventually they disappear. And so we really care about these people here, and we want them to succeed. So I guess we look at it as a lot of tough love. We love them up, and we do everything we can for them. Heidi feeds them at least once a week so that they are starving young artists. But with that said, we really, really expect a lot out of them. We moved up to this area in 1989, so we've been here over 30 years. We lived over on the other side of the lake. We lived on the South Shore in northern Wisconsin. Of course, we came to Duluth and enjoyed it and ate and shopped and this and that. We really weren't part of it. By buying this school, by creating this presence, we're now in the heart of it, and it has a vibrant arts community. It's a beautiful city. It's a hidden gem, and it's interesting because of its early wealth. There's a lot of exceedingly well-educated, well-traveled people who choose to live in this area because they just love it. There's something very unique about it. The exciting thing was when we bought the school, well, do you build it? Will they come? Well, here we are. We hadn't even started. We just started demolition, and we started getting phone calls and people, young guys, people, I want to check out your school. Well, it's not really a school yet. Can I apply? Could be yeah, sure. Come on by, and we'd look at their work. Yeah, you did wonderful. We'd love to have you, but it'll be a while. Let's start now. There's not even heat. That's okay. And so we were able to work. We're up in the balcony after we'd completed the work up there. We stuck them up in the balcony, and construction workers down below, and we started our school in the midst of all this. And so while we just finished the construction a year ago, we're in our third year of training. It was interesting. It was, teaching and doing construction at the same time, challenging. But with that said, it felt vibrant. And it felt like we weren't just banging our head against, well, what are we doing here? Why are we fixing this building? We had a running school.
It's really fun to have students that are really thirsty and really appreciate this knowledge, and they work so hard to improve their skills. When they do make improvements, it's a huge reward for me as it is for them, I feel like.
It's based upon the ateliers of the past. It's a traditional approach toward creativity. When you go there, you see individuals working from plaster casts. I've gone to studio classes at universities. I taught at universities for almost 50 years, and they're not teaching you to work slowly and carefully to develop that point of view.
It's funny because how I go at this, and I want to be the best that ever was. Now, is that ever going to happen? Probably not. If it did, will I ever know? No. An artist's place is determined usually 100 years after they die. There's a lot of artists in history that when they died, the people lined the streets, they were a national hero, only to be forgotten within 20 years, and we don't even know who they are. And other people who died in obscurity are now considered some of the greats. So I'll never know where I end up. But I would just I'd hate to be sitting in my rocking chair and I'm 95 years old looking back saying, you know what, I didn't do my best. I wasted what I was given. I didn't work hard enough. I let my ego get in the way. For whatever it was, I just want to know that I fought a good fight, and I'll be happy. I'll be content.